and we'll record this. We'll go and record this and put this up on the YouTube channel and have everybody that might participate in the camp participate, whether it's this camp or subsequent camps, and we'll go from there. All right.
Yeah.
So
I just started the recording, so go ahead and do, and I can edit this first part out, but just go ahead and do an introduction, and then and introduce Bob, and then I'll stay out of it from now on.
Sure. Okay. So the purpose of this recording is basically give folks more knowledge about how they can fly from Salida, the KA airport, both in terms of safety and in terms of gliding strategies. So Bob Caldwell is a person that's very experienced in flying from Salida, and overall a very high hour experienced glider pilot. So I don't have any more detailed bio information, but I think we all know that he's a very accomplished pilot through his LLC performances from Boulder and elsewhere. And I'm very excited to learn what he knows about Harriet Alexander Field at Salida. All right, thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Elliot, and thanks, Armin. I'm going to go to share screen here, and oops, the host has to allow me to share my screen.
Try it now, Bob.
Okay. There's my Ventus over Boulder. Anyway, thank you again for the introduction. I'd like to stress the fact that Salida, Colorado is one of the premier soaring sites in the nation. It is just a spectacular place to fly, not only for flying conditions, but also for the overall scenery and the mountain experience. It's been a special place for me, and I'm showing this opening slide here just because this was, I think, my first flight out of Salida once I owned my own sailplane. This is an ASW 28 back in, I think, 2004. And you can see the beautiful rainbow, and I'm looking out. I'm probably on the flanks of Mount Chavano here, and I'm looking kind of northeast up the Arkansas Valley. And just as an introduction to what we want to talk about here is, I want to give some background about the airport itself, some idiosyncrasies about some of the weather conditions you can expect down there. And I also want to focus a lot on just the geography of the location, because I think it's very important for your soaring experience down there to really understand the geography. And I encourage anybody who's not a Colorado local and has a lot of experience down in that neck of the woods to kind of study a map a bit to really understand how everything lays out. I know we've got other experienced pilots on here, Mike and Carl, and people that have probably flown around the Salida area a lot. And of interesting note, it used to be in order to fly Salida, you had to go to Salida. Nowadays, it's not hard to fly to Salida from Boulder once you get your legs under you. And in fact, I flew to Salida, 2 days ago. And anyway, it's a beautiful place to fly. I'm going to show a few slides here of scenery down there taken in flight, and then I'm going to talk about those a little later. But I'll try not to keep you too long tonight either. So the first image is basically looking from Cloud Base down the Sangre de Cristos. And for those not really familiar with that geography, the Sangre de Cristos run from Salida to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And, we had groups of people down there flying last week, flying out of Salida, and one pilot flying an LS-3 flew to Taos and back from Salida. So on this particular day, as you look down that cloud line over the Sangres, you probably could go to Taos and turn very few times. But we'll talk more about that picture in a moment. Another photo taken, this is from Mount Antero, which is northwest of the town of Salida. Let me see if I can get my pointer hooked up here. The town of Salida is right over here, and the airport's right near there as well. The Sangre de Cristo's run down here. You can see this was taken in the fall. The aspens are turning, and you'll probably have some of that this weekend when you're down there. Another image here is looking north along the Collegiate Peaks. The Arkansas Valley's there to your right. Just to go through and give you an orientation here, this obviously north is up in this image, town of Salida here, the airport's over here. This photo, aerial photo, is somewhat dated, but I think still current enough. What you can see is most of the flying, and we'll talk about this in more detail, you'll be taking off to the east on runway 6, which is downhill, more on that later. But what you can see is that this area out here off the end of runway 6 is irrigated cropland. There's also some drier land hayfields. And so there's lots of bailout options off the end of runway 6. Runway 24, or yeah, 24, over here, you can also see there's irrigated cropland there. This is filled in a little more with development now. The main highway 285 is right here off the end of runway 24. Poncha Pass is here to the south. The Arkansas River Valley runs down along this area and continues on out here through Canyon City and on to Pueblo. The main flying area for people that don't want to really get too adventurous is going to be along the Arkansas River Valley here, which is spectacular flying, and there's good airports all along the way. We'll talk some more about that in a moment as well. The airport itself, the altitude here, I believe, where is the altitude? Oh, right here. What you can see is that they give 2 different elevations for the same runway. And that's because there's about close to a 2% grade on the runway. And that's important for your landing and taking off, because taking off downhill has an advantage. Somebody's doggy here.
Oh yeah, that's mine. He's not much to do about him. I'll close my door.
Anyway, the 2% grade on the runway is important to note for a couple of reasons. And you note that all the traffic patterns are left traffic. But the runways are plenty long. They are wide enough easily for anything but the biggest ship. The taxiways, if you're flying more than an 18-meter ship where you need to taxi with the wing down, won't work. You'll have to tow out. I don't think anybody going is going to have a longer span than that, but the taxiways barely accommodate an 18-meter glider with a wing down. So anyway, in terms of taking off and landing, again, I suggest, if at all possible, taking off downhill and landing uphill. Just as a suggestion, which I had a couple of bad landings when I was there, not terrible, but one of the things I tend to do is I tend to look forward as I'm planning my flare. And as you do that, you're looking uphill. And so you'll have a tendency to want to flare a little early, but just kind of try and hold it off as long as you can. The frequencies, 122.7 is the CTAF and Unicom. AWOS, there's 133.85. And the AWAS, I'll talk a little more about that later, but that's something you'll want to have dialed in and be monitoring on a regular basis just to see the trend of the wind development there in Salida. And probably some of you have heard some stories that it's a dangerous place to fly, or it's challenging because of crosswinds. I think that the challenging part can be true. Dangerous, I don't think so, but you do want to pay attention and to be prepared to go ahead and cope with potential crosswind situations. More on that coming up later. And by the way, with as few people as we have on here, if I haven't covered anything, feel free to speak up. Here's
So,
an area. Go
If I
ahead.
could briefly interrupt you the question here. So obviously with takeoff, you have the opportunity to take off or not, but with landing, is there a particular wind speed where if winds are coming from the east, that you would go ahead and land to the east in spite of the 2% grade? I'm sure this depends on glider and air brakes and stuff like that, but do you have a general rule of thumb?
Well, yes, absolutely. If there's any significant east wind, or it'll usually be cross, because if you'll recall, I showed you how the Arkansas Valley heads off from Salida down toward Canyon City. What you're going to see is that the terrain tends to focus the wind in two different directions. So it's going to come up the Arkansas Valley, and so you're going to have a crosswind landing on 6. So you're going to be going ahead and landing on runway 6, but you're going to expect a crosswind coming up the Arkansas Valley. The other thing is the wind can come over Poncha Pass, and that's going to create a crosswind situation coming kind of in this direction, meaning that you now are going to have to negotiate a crosswind landing on 2-4, whereas if it's coming up the Arkansas Valley from the Canyon City area and the Wet Valley, it's probably coming more from the Wet Valley than from the Arkansas. But we'll look at a little more of that later as we look at the topography there. And so, yes, by all means, monitor AWAS and be prepared to, land appropriately. And one thing about the downhill grade, most of the downhill grade is from this intersection, which is A3, I think, is this intersection here. That's right off the ramp at the airport. And so most of the downhill is going to be from there on. It's more flat on this section of the runway. So I think if you have to land on 2-4, you want to try and touch down back up here and roll to one of these intersections. Whereas if you're landing to the west, excuse me, I said that wrong. If you're landing on 6, you're going to want to land, on the shorter end of the field. If you're landing on 2-4, you can touch down almost to this first taxiway here and make this second turn point, because second taxiway, because again, this is uphill, and it's a fairly good distance between those two taxiways as it is. One thing to note too is there's no taxiway the rest of the way down here to the departure end of 2-4. And so if you do have to go down to the end of 2-4 to launch because of a wind change, and again, we're going to try and get off before the wind builds out of the west. So try and be ready. Don't plan on trying to fly at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and taking off on runway 6, because it will have built out of the west by then, in all likelihood. Just the ramp here is not huge, but what we're going to do is, I think the airport manager appreciates us if we tie down along the tie downs that are on the north end of the ramp. So this area here, that also facilitates you being able to get out in the morning to be able to launch, because the powered aircraft will be tied down to the south of you. So anyway, the ramp I put a note here, the gate code. I noticed Elliot had that on his email as well, but the gate code's 1227, and then hit pound to engage the gate. There's water facilities here. There is now an A&P on the field, but I don't believe he has oxygen. So as Elliot mentioned, make sure the club ships are topped off with oxygen and topped off a full bottle before you head down to Salida. And it would be good if we can bring a full bottle down there. Anyway, the typical towing operation is going to stage at this taxiway right here. And so what you're going to do is you tow your glider down to this taxiway. You're going to put it off into the grass, again, short of the hold short line, and get it staged down here so that when it's your turn, you can just push out onto the runway, and the tow plane will usually be landing on 2-4 uphill, and then it's going to whip a U here and be ready to tow the next glider. So anyway, any questions on the airport layout? The next one is just an image of the Denver sectional with Salida here in the center. And I think it's good to look at this because you can kind of tell what the terrain is like. Those of you that are chasing 14,000 foot peaks and want to grab some 14,000 foot peaks, you can literally fly probably 15, maybe 20 if you're adventuresome out of Salida without too much stress. So from Salida, the typical way you're going to get up is you tow in two different directions, depending on what kind of wind you have and what kind of cloud development you're seeing. The first direction you're going to tow, which is the easiest, is over here to Poncha Pass. So this high ground right here at Poncha Pass is a typical place for you to get dropped off, and typically you can get away with a 2,000 foot tow, but you know, one longer tow is cheaper than two short ones. So anyway, tow till you can connect, but also don't impact your fellow pilots. The other way is to tow over here, sort of to the west-northwest to the flanks of Mount Chavano. And again, if the winds are blowing out of the west very strong, you don't want to be in the lee of that mountain. But that area here is going to be east facing. It's going to heat up first, and it's going to provide a way to get away. When I was down there last week, we were getting away right here at the field. I was motoring to about 9,000 feet and was able to get away cleanly right near the field. There's badlands, that kind of rugged terrain and non-landable terrain over here. And that again tends to kick off thermals, and you can get away fairly close to the airport. So anyway, when you're flying out of Salida, just to kind of look at the topography here, we have the Collegiate Peaks running up this high ground here that you can see where the terrain is highlighted on the sectional. And there's, I don't know, maybe somebody can correct me, but there's got to be about 8 14ers in that area, from Chavano to Antero to Princeton, Yale, Harvard, Columbia, on up all the way to Elbert, which is the highest peak in Colorado, and Mount Massive, which is a big mountain as well. And so this is a common area that you want to fly. And again, you've got airports all the way. You've got Salida here, Buena Vista, and then, whoops, didn't mean to make that come down. And then Lake County, which is just out of view here at the top at Leadville. And again, remember, you're starting out flying at 7,500 foot field elevation at Salida, and Leadville is about 10,000 foot field elevation. So the terrain is rising as you fly up the Arkansas Valley here. The other side of the Arkansas Valley works really well as what, in addition, in that there's good high ground that tends to kick off thermals. You get up here into the Mosquito Range, and there's other 14ers up there, Mount Sherman, Mount Bross, Mount Lincoln are up in this area. If you get really adventuresome up here, there's Aspen. So away you go. And again, Independence Pass crosses from Twin Lakes, which is right here, over into Aspen. So none of you may be too adventuresome in doing that, but you can fly certainly all along this area and keep an airport in sight and in glide at all times, either on the east side or the west side of the valley. The other common milk run out of Salida is the Sangre de Cristos here. And again, you can go all the way to Santa Fe if the spirit moves you. So the Sangres are a spectacular mountain range because in most areas, they're only like one mountain wide. And it's really interesting to see how the weather is affected by this mountain range that is really just almost a singular spine. At least it is up here close to Salida. The terrain then is, this is the wet valley down here. And we've got a public airport down here called Silver Cliff that is a paved runway and a good bailout spot. There's a number of private airports all along through here that you can keep in mind. Over on the west side of the Sangres, this is the San Luis Valley over here. And that doesn't have near the airports that the other side of the Sangres does. But if you tuned into Clement's land out field presentation that he did, the 2-part land out fields he did, he identifies a whole bunch of fields down along the San Luis Valley here on the west side of the Sangre de Cristos. And there's a field that should be in your database right here near Villa Grove called JZ Ranch. I haven't visited that site, but that's been always landable in the past. As you get over here, you have Saguache Airport that is very landable, public airport. If you get adventuresome again and you cross Monarch Pass, which is right through this area, there's a ski area here. And there's another high peak. I'm not sure it's a 14er called Mount Uray that's just right there. And again, that's a good, if you're flying the Collegiants and you come down here to Mount Uray and then you can jump to the Sangres. And again, fly a lot of that region always with a good airport in sight and in glide range. But if you cross Monarch Pass, now you're over into the Gunnison area. This whole valley here is ranch land and a lot of hay fields. So there's good landing sites over here if you tend to venture over this way. Taylor Park is up in this area. That's a little more spooky. It's on the west side of the Collegiate Peaks. And again, a lot of that area is probably landable, but it's going to be a difficult retrieve. An area probably more of you're familiar with here is South Park. And again, there's private airports over there, as well as most of South Park. As you drive to Salida, keep an eye open as to what you see there in South Park, because basically most of South Park is landable. There are rocks in some areas, fences, some ditches, but it's really pretty benign ground surface there in South Park. So as you're driving to Salida, kind of keep your eyes open for land out facilities that are there, even though they may not be airports, they're safe places to land. So anyway, this is where I wanted to stress that you kind of understand this topography. Again, the Arkansas River Valley here, running all the way over to Canyon City and then eventually to Pueblo. This is an east slope river because again, it's dumping into eventually the Gulf of Mexico. You cross Monarch Pass, you're on the western slope, and now you're having the Gunnison River draining that area. There's a private airport. This is Crested Butte here. There's a private airport at Crested Butte that's a hard surface runway, and they won't appreciate you landing there, but by all means, if you're over in that area and you're low, don't pass up a good paved runway. So anyway, anybody have any questions you want to discuss about the topography and the airports around Salida? Okay, moving on. I'm going to pass over this really quickly because all of you know this, but if you're taking a club glider down there, those trailers probably haven't seen a lot of service lately. Make sure the tires are inflated. I'm sorry, this is the glider part, but I'm ahead of myself. Make sure that, you know, the gliders are all in good shape. You know, the tires are inflated, your flight computer's up to speed. You got your FlarmNet file, map sectionals. Hopefully people flying here, if you're venturing very far away from home, you want to have a tracker and for sure a cell phone. But there's areas you can land out down there that you're not going to have cell phone service. So a tracker is pretty important. And all of you should have your personal land out kit if you're flying club airplanes even. Kind of do a little research on the internet and you can figure out what all you want to put in that land out kit. But, you know, sunscreen, mosquito repellent, an ability to, you know, secure your aircraft with, I carry garbage bags from a trash compactor that you can fill up with dirt and you can sit it on a wing just to hold that wing down and block off your tail and your main gear so they aren't going to roll. So make sure you have all that figured out in advance. Trailer, kind of the same thing applies. We talked earlier about having equipment in the trailers that are going to be able to be used in case of a land out. A 2x4 section that you could put through the spar box to be able to handle the glider with a couple people while the wings are off. That's important. The bolt cutter, fence wire, etc. That's all good stuff to have in your land out kit. And again, I'll go back to that image of Salida Airport again in a moment, but I'll show you where the trailers are going to be stowed. And when your trailer's stowed empty, especially, you want to have the jack stands down. And if you don't have jack stands, tie down both the front and rear of the trailer. If you do have jack stands, or put down the jack stands in the rear and tie down the front of the trailer to a claw or some, you know, secure stake you can drive in the ground to tie down the front of the trailer. Because when trailers are empty, they really are subject to blow around. So make sure that you secure your trailer. And again, I'll go back and show you where the trailers go. I meant to point that out on my way through.
Bob?
Yes.
Yeah, last year we put together a retrieve kit that's in the parachute shack. And I don't know if, I know last time I was in, I could see at least some remnants of it. We had a couple 2x4s, locks, you know, whatever that's similar to the list that you have. Somebody probably wouldn't hurt if somebody looked in there and I guess see what materials are there and what we have to add to it, because really we just need one land out kit, I imagine.
I think that would be sufficient. Yeah. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
The last thing I have down here about communicate, that's something that goes with, you know, preparation for the glider too, is typically once you're up and away, typically you're probably going to be on 123.3, which will be the frequency for the camp, I presume. And on that frequency, if you are low, keep your fellow pilots informed as to where you are and what all's going on, because once you get down to the point of actually landing, you may have reduced radio communication and you may not have cell phone communication. So if you are getting desperate and getting in a situation where you're probably going to land someplace other than home, communicate that with your fellow pilots. Don't give up too soon. I'm not suggesting that, but once it's inevitable, make you the radio call, then turn off the radio and focus on landing your aircraft safely. I'm not sure how this is all going to be made. I made this presentation years ago when we actually were having pilots meetings and weather briefing every day. But typically get to the airport early and get your stuff together. Make sure your glider's together with all the stuff you're gonna want to carry in your glider. If there's a pilots meeting and a weather brief, you'll be pretty much ready to go. Get your glider down there to the staging area, and you're ready to rock. I'm going to go through this really quickly because I think you already know all this, but you want to, if you aren't having weather briefings from some other experienced weather forecaster that's going to be there, do your own forecasting. Look where the weather's going to be best and kind of plan your area for your flight accordingly. And so again, the areas that I've got listed there are the same areas that I mentioned earlier. This is a great area to try and do a task that will qualify for a badge, or if you're just going to fly OLC. And again, I encourage you to not just, orbit the airport. You can do a really cool task, and I'm going to go back to that image of the sectional in a moment, where you could do like a triangle around the Salida airport that won't even take you out of glide of the airport. And it's kind of like our tasks out of Boulder, the what are those called? I forget what Clemens came up with those along with some other people. The tasks out of Boulder for practicing cross country, but you can do a
Proving
really
grounds.
nice proving grounds. Thanks, Armin. Anyway, the area around Salida is really conducive to that because you can do a triangle just right around the airport, and you can make it as big or as little as you want, and it prevents you. It gives you a plan so that you're not just going from 17,000 feet to your next climb at 16.8 up to 17.8, and you're just orbiting from thermal to thermal. So I really encourage you to take advantage of the fact that there's, on a good day there's lots of options. So you can do this triangle around the airport. You could do it out and back up and along the Arkansas Valley or down the Sangre de Cristos. And I really encourage you to get out there and see some of that countryside because it's absolutely beautiful. And again, I'll give you the caveat that I didn't get credit for a 750 kilometer flight because I picked a turn point on top of a mountain and I couldn't get back to that top of that mountain to make the turn point. So pick your turn point someplace that you can make even if the day is ending and you're not able to get to high altitude. The operational issues, I've already mentioned a bunch of this, but you're going to see your launch to the east, land to the west, crosswinds from the south, either the southeast or the southwest will be a likelihood. And we didn't see anything that was very strong at all last week. I never saw any wind on landing greater than 10 knots. And again, a lot of times everybody's going to be coming home at once toward the end of the day. So plan your touchdown so you're able to roll to the intersection so you're easily able to clear the runway. And if you're landing uphill, account for that slope because it makes a big difference. And for those pilots that are at the airport not flying, try and be at the airport when people are coming home, because if people roll to a stop on the runway, 100 yards from an intersection, they're really going to need help. So jump in a car and get out there and help them clear the runway quickly. And again, I mentioned the bailout spots. If you have a moment when you're arriving in Salida, kind of take a look at that. The typical way into the airport, if you're coming down southbound on 285, you will come across a turn that's marked with a sign that says "to the airport." And you won't have to go to Salida to get to the airport that way. You can actually turn off 285 and go straight to the airport on a county road. I don't recall the number, but it's on the map. So anyway, that'll take you past your bailout spots to the west of the field. And so you can do your scouting as you pull in. In terms of the databases, I think if you have the most current database, it should be pretty reliable. The older databases show airports that aren't landable or haven't existed for 50 years, kind of thing, or they're going to be too narrow to accommodate a glider. So do pay attention to what's really landable and what's not. Again, keep track of the AWOS during your flight, because the winds will change and the active runway will eventually change. If you have to relight, again, what's typically going to happen is you're going to towed to the east on 6, and you'll be over on Poncha Pass area trying to get up. If you can't get up, you're typically going to land on 6. So you're going to be landing to the east and land short of the glider staging area. So we can go back to that image if there's any confusion on that. Anyway, the crosswind issue, as you're monitoring AWOS, one option is to stay aloft until it mellows out. And it typically will mellow out as it approaches sunset. And you'll be able to, if it's a decent day, you can fly till sunset there. That's an option. Buena Vista, again, is an option that's not very far away. I've got the frequencies down here. The CTAF is 22.8 and the AWOS is 32.925. Again, one of the things that has caught me in the past, and Bob Ferris had the same experience, we talked about it last week, and that is it was pretty cross and nasty at Salida. So we went down to Buena Vista and it was cross and nasty at Buena Vista, even though the runways are at right angles to each other or close to it. And so you would have thought that the Arkansas Valley would focus the winds north and south. Well, it was blowing due west at Buena Vista. So anyway, that wasn't a doable thing. And so check the AWOS at Buena Vista and make yourself a little cheat sheet with these frequencies written down on it that you can have, in your cockpit with you, so you don't have to be scrounging around looking for them. And again, if you're flying, everybody's your buddy, but pick somebody in particular to watch out for and have them watch out for you, and communicate with them as you're flying. This is that staging area that we were talking about here. This is the taxiway that I pointed out to you. And basically that's an area where you can tow your gliders down there, get them off the field so that if there's powered aircraft, because there will be other aircraft operating in Salida that will be taxiing around here. So keep your gliders free of the taxiway as you're staging. So anyway, this this photo was taken some time ago. You can see Doug Weibel there in the red shirt, and Gary Bauman is here. I'm not sure who all else is there, but some of the old-time members of the SSB are in this photo.
Bob,
Yeah.
a question. Is somebody going to be taking the handheld radios? Particularly if there's other traffic that's going to be entering the pattern or taking off to communicate with them?
That I don't know. I'm not going to be there personally. I just agreed to do the briefing because I won't be there. But if you have a handheld radio, by all means, bring it. Make sure it's charged. And you know, in terms of the club radios, I presume, you know, go ahead and take it, because I think we have a base station now in the shack that so we won't be radioless at the club. So
Yeah,
anyway,
so we can do that.
okay. This photo I'm showing here is just showing what it looks like rolling to the east down Salida behind the old 8.5 Fox before Gary made it beautiful, along with the help of other club members. Flying out of Salida, it's nothing magic. It's just like any other soaring site. The ridges tend to focus the lift in the clouds first, but they will OD first. The reliable routes generally follow the major mountain ranges. As a rule of thumb, too, try to stay above the rocks, because that'll keep you out of winds that are going to be very fickle flying around these big peaks. These peaks, you know, change the weather, to change the wind direction, and so always be aware of the wind, and don't put yourself in the lee of these big mountains below the top or near the top, because the winds definitely are something to contend with, especially at altitude here, and especially over big mountains. Blue days, again, hopefully you have great cumulus all week, but try to follow the ridges and the high ground. If you're flying the valleys, again, it's not uncommon to see the clouds form along the valleys. And in that situation, that's almost always an indicative of convergence. If you see it not focused along the high ground or the big peaks, if the cloud line is running down the middle of the valley, that's almost always a sign of convergence. So again, try and work out in your own mind which side is going up and which side is going down. So if you're on one side of the cloud line and it's not working, go to the other side. Just as a point that I almost always make is going from point A to point B is rarely a straight line. And so follow the lift, follow the clouds. And I always have to mention Collins' rule, and that is, you know, don't shade your flight toward the airport, you know, because a lot of us have that tendency where you've been flying along, you've been staying at 17,000 feet plus or minus. It's been a great run. And now all of a sudden you find yourself down to 13. And there's an airport, say Buena Vista, off your right wing. And, you know, so you kind of just inch your way out toward Buena Vista Airport to make sure you can make it there. Don't do that. As long as you're not in danger of really not making it to that airport, stay where the lift is. So Collins always said, if you insist on landing at an airport, you will. And so again, my suggestion here is, as long as you're prepared to do it, be willing to land out if you have to. Do it safely. Again, one of the things I think is a common Colorado issue is the weather's going to change during the flight. There's going to be times when you're in good weather, and there's going to be times when you're in not so good weather. Be willing to divert, fly to where it's good, try and get high and stay high. But again, don't just limit yourself to a 1,000-foot altitude band around 17,000 feet. And one of the things too, if all of a sudden when you're monitoring AWOS and you find the Salida, all of a sudden the weather's gone to wind at 190 at 30, don't go there then, because it's going to suck. So as long as you can stay in the air, figure out where it's not going to be bad, figure out where you can fly and be able to safely land if that weather doesn't change. But just, I know myself, I always had that tendency that, oh, the wind's building at home, I better get home. Well, you might get there 20 minutes, a half an hour later, and it might be even worse. And so again, don't go back home when the weather sucks there. As long as you can stay in the air safely, don't do it. And again, have a plan. I really encourage you to do that. Don't mill around the airport. Go ahead and fly, even if it's 5 miles this way and 10 miles back that way. Have a plan and fly it. I told you we'd talk a little more about the terrain there. This is a photo I showed you earlier, obviously, looking down the Sangres to the south. And to the right here, this is the San Luis Valley. And again, a lot of that valley is cultivated, especially as you get further south. And a lot of that valley is landable. Again, there are private airports along here. If you happen to need one, feel free to use one. You probably won't get shot. And, if things get threatening, just call the sheriff. Again, over here is the Wet Mountain Valley. And over here out of the pictures is the Wet Mountain Range, which basically runs from Canyon City down to Greenhorn Peak. That mountain range can be very good too. And if you encounter a day when there aren't clouds on the Sangres, a lot of times there'll be clouds on the Wet Mountain Range. And right about here where my pointer is where Silver Cliff Airport is. And so again, as long as you're staying high along here and flying along, you'll have Silver Cliff in glide. And so if you are leaving glide, be familiar with your flight computer. Most flight computers allow you to have 2 active waypoints at any given time. And so you can do the leapfrog methodology if you're flying cross country, whereby you can leave Salida in one turn point, and then you can set Silver Cliff in the other turn point, and you fly. You can make it back to Salida. You can make it back to Salida. Okay, now I can make it to Silver Cliff, and so you can keep going further and still keep that airport and glide. So if you're familiar with your flight computer and can put 2 turn points in that are active at the same time, you can then use that for a leapfrog kind of operation, going down the Sangres or wherever, going up the Arkansas Valley. It works really well as well. So again, this is a primary run down the Sangres. You can fly almost down here to Crestone Peak on a good day and still have glide back home to Salida in the Club Discus, for instance. It may be slightly out of glide back to Salida, but then you can dial in Silver Cliff, but that might be in the lee side of these mountains, or you can dial in JZ Ranch, which is the landable field that's right about here where my pointer is. So again, use your flight computer and use it to change around these waypoints. So here's an image looking south, again from Mount Antero. It's the same mountain range, the Sangre de Cristos here, The sand dunes, I think, are right here. So that's a doable flight for a reasonably accomplished pilot flying down the Sangres. You'll probably be out of glide of Salida by the time you get there, but that's a doable flight on a good day along here, and you can keep good safe landing areas in place. And again, this is the Arkansas Valley headed out here, and this is the Wet Mountain Valley. So as I'd indicated, the crosswinds from the south are typically going to be pumping up out of the wet valley here, or out of the Arkansas Valley into Salida, which is right about here, or they're going to be coming out of the San Luis Valley and crossing Poncha Pass. This is looking north, again, along the Collegian Peaks. And again, this is a whole line of 14,000 foot peaks. And so, you know, you're going to want to stay high here to keep above those rocks. This is the Arkansas River Valley here, and the Mosquito Range there. Leadville or Lake County Airport is going to sit right about where the pointer is. And again, Buena Vista is just out of view here, probably about where Jack is. So these are the primary routes out of Salida, and I encourage you to fly these. And again, be safe, keep an airport in sight and in glide at all times. This is an image of the sand dunes. This is a day with relatively low cloud base, and there was actually convergence this day. The sand dunes are here, and that's for those of you that haven't visited there before, it's quite a remarkable geographic feature in that it sits in this hole, kind of in the Sangre de Cristos here, and the sand is all wind deposited and dropped off in this hole. And it's pretty spectacular from the air and pretty cool to visit on the ground. Now, on this particular day, the cloud base here on the west side of the Sangres was only at 13,000. And if you went across the wet valley over to the wet mountains, the cloud base was at 18,000 feet. So go figure. You know, a distance between the crest of the Sangres and crossing the wet valley is maybe 15 miles, something thereabout. And the weather conditions were that different. So if you're up north, this is Twin Lakes. Wait, no, that's not. That is Twin Lakes. I'm sorry. This is Granite Reservoir here, Twin Lakes, and this valley here goes up Independence Pass to Aspen. And it's remarkable how close Aspen is. You know, you're used to driving these distances, and you get up high over this area of the Collegian Peaks, and you're literally looking right down into the Aspen Valley or the Roaring Fork Valley. So it's spectacular, and these points are relatively close by air. But again, right here by Granite, probably, I'd say 10 miles south of Granite is Buena Vista Airport. Then up this way, probably only 5 miles or so north of the Twin Lakes area is Lake County Airport. And so again, you've got two good hard surface runways within easy glide of where I am when I took this picture. But here's what can happen too. I'm up by, this is Leadville here, and this is Lake County Airport right there. And all of a sudden, things aren't looking so good back toward home. This is the Twin Lakes area. And actually, the weather to the left, actually more toward Salida, wasn't that bad. I made it home easily that day. But, you know, again, if this kind of weather starts coming in and you're a long ways from home, you got a nice friendly airport there. And I think Ben Pinnell landed there not too long ago. These links are probably not important, so I'm not going to spend any time on it. But the one I will talk about briefly here is the Soaring data website. You can get airspace data there, but you can also get TFR data, and you can actually download the TFR file and put it in your flight computer. I'm not sure if you guys have been through that drill in the past, but you go to that website, you click on the TFR section, you tell it what airport you want it to be localized around and what kind of distance, and you tell it what kind of file you need, like a cup file or some other waypoint file, and you can download the TFR right to your flight computer. So that's a very valuable thing. I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm going to run back quickly here to the sectional chart. Well, actually, no, I was going to run back to the airport chart where we stowed the trailers. The fuel pumps are right here under my pointer. And then in this area between the fuel pumps and the edge of the ramp, there's room for probably 10 trailers. And so once you get rigged and your gliders are tied out, this is where you want to set your trailers off the asphalt in the grass, kind of pointed north and south, and again, secure them. So anyway, I think that's about all I had. The one other thing I wanted to mention is, there's certainly a possibility that you're going to have non-flyable days while you're down there, or if you're sharing a club ship, it may not be your day. There's tons of stuff to do in Salida and the Salida area. If you're a fly fisherman, the Arkansas River is great fly fishing. There's fantastic mountain biking, hiking, kayaking in the Arkansas. Just a zillion things to do. Salida is kind of a cool little town if you just want to kick around downtown, and there's pretty good restaurants there. So anyway, probably come prepared to do some other activity while you're down there, because you may have a non-flyable day or whatever, but it's actually a beautiful place to recreate in a lot of different areas other than just flying gliders. So anyway, that's all I have. Let's have some discussion if they got some questions or thoughts and additions to what I had to say.
Bob, do you happen to know where there's camping allowed at the airport there, based on that picture?
There is. Elliot, do you want to address that?
So I actually don't know the specifics on that. I don't know if Scott can speak to that. I just know that the airport manager does allow it. He's fine with it, as long as it's no more than 7 days and related to aviation-related pursuits. I think it's allowed, but maybe Scott can give the details.
In the past, when I was down there, people have camped over in this area here by some of the hangars and camped along here. Although this hangar didn't used to be there, there's a business jet in this hangar and a Pilatus single engine turboprop in this hangar. But this area right along here used to be where we camped a lot, although this hangar with the biz jet in it wasn't there at the time. So anyway, I'm sure that if you get down there, the airport manager's name is Zach, and he's a really friendly, accommodating guy. So he'll be somebody that'll be, very easy to deal with. And there is another guy that is his understudy named Dave, who can be a little cranky, but his bark is worse than his bite. Just kind of don't alienate him. Go ahead. Any other questions?
Bob, on the Sangre de Cristos, do you get good lift on the east side even in the afternoon, or is it pretty much you need to be on the sunny side of that ridge?
Well, I think it's a lot wind dependent on that, Armand, in that it can be fine flying on the east side in light winds. But if it's blowing 10, 15 out of the west, you don't want to be over there, especially low. But again, look where the clouds are. Hopefully that'll give you a clue. But if you do get blown off onto the east side of the Sangres, I would recommend that you maybe make the crossing across the valley onto the wet mountains and use those to come home on, because you just don't want to be stuck on the lee side there if the wind's blowing at all. And again, later in the day, the west side will for sure be better. And for those of you that don't speak Spanish or don't see it, Sangre de Cristo is the blood of Christ in Spanish. And what happens, the sunset lights those mountains up on the west side with just a brilliant kind of reddish glow. It's really a beautiful sunset. And you can see where they came up with the name for the mountain range. Any other questions for anybody? Well, if not, then everybody have a great time, fly safely, and go ahead and push your comfort zone if it's safe to do so. And, visit some places that are exciting and beautiful, because this is the place to do it.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, this is just a fantastic lecture. I'm laying so much of it. We really appreciate you doing this, and we'll distribute this to the club as a whole.
All right. Well, anyway, thanks for your attention, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you folks. So again, have a great time and be safe. Oh, I see we do have one chat here. I don't know if there was a chat. Oh, thanks from Carl. Thanks, Carl. Anyway, be safe. Bye-bye.
Okay, Elliot, thank you too for putting it together.
Yeah, Elliot, are you gonna give everybody an update on status?
Yeah, so unfortunately, a couple hours ago, I got a message from our tow pilot that his plane is a mechanical issue. So right now we're working very hard to basically find another tow pilot. So we've tried to reach out to everybody that we know of, the tow list, as well as Mile High Gliding, and I'll try to send an update very quickly. But I'm still hoping to basically try to pull something together here in terms of tow pilot. And if nothing else, I know there's a decent number of self-launch gliders that are on the list. And I think that some of them may enjoy flying for the weekend, even if we can't get the whole club down with a tow plane.
So are we on hold then right now?
Right, let me give it another hour. I've only sent, 2 hours ago, sent out a bunch of emails to the tow list as well as Mile High Gliding. But I'll send an update later tonight.
Okay, great. We'll wait to hear from you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, if there's nothing else, then I guess we'll sign off. Good night, everyone.
Adios.
Good night.